I want to talk about the health and future now of a booming craft that is sports journalism. There's only one uni in Australia offering a dedicated sports journalism degree. It's La Trobe in Melbourne. Associate Professor Dr. Lawrie started the course and journalist David Lowden teaches it, and I spoke to them this week. Well, Lawrie, David, welcome. Thanks for your time. Let's get straight to the grassroots of sports journalism. Where did this unique course, start, Lawrie?
It started, Paul, with a chat with one of my graduating students a few years ago. He'd spent a semester in upstate New York, in Ithaca, and he loved it there, and I asked him why, and he said, well, we got to cover all of the college sport teams, and it was, for him, not just, sport that he loved, but he also got a real sense of how to do interviews, how to report on things that had happened, and he said, if you could at La Trobe, it would be great just to build in sport in some way, just to teach kids reporting. Yeah. And it turned out the idea sort of stuck with me for a while, and it turned out we actually had have a great sport management program already in another faculty, and we started talking to them what would happen if we actually joined forces in some way and tried to put together our first Bachelor of Sport Journalism degree in the country. And over a 2-year period we got it together, and it's been informed by another statistic, if you like, which is that when you look at how many journalists there are in the Canberra Press Gallery, it's under 250, yeah. And then how many are accredited with the AFL, it's about 760. Yeah. It was obvious to me that not only are a lot of our students really interested in sport, but career opportunities of various kinds seem to be a little bit more buoyant in sport journalism than in some other areas of journalism, like arts journalism, where I originally cut my teeth. So it seemed to make sense to create a vocational degree, but to link it very closely to the traditional Bachelor of Journalism, and to hire someone really good to head the degree, which is the man on my left here, David Lowden. And
David, you've got a traditional background in general news, and
started in general news and then went into sport. I had a news director one day say, actually, we're looking for someone to do sport. Do I still get paid? Am I actually going to get to do journalism and sport? But that's the key, I think, to the degree at La Trobe, is we want them to be journalists first who happen to write about sport and not sports fans. We're not really trying to teach them about boosterism or, your job is there as a journalist to report the truth, to do the same things that a journalist does. So.
Obviously, you've got a critical eye on sports journalism and its health and well-being and the standards being set. And picking up your point, Lawrie, on the statistics, with that many journos covering the AFL, surely standards are lower than they are in other parts of journalism.
Well, one of the real reasons that I wanted to get into journalism education, and something that I'd wanted to do for a while, is I really did fear, and this sounds a little bit lofty, but I did fear for the future of sport journalism a little bit. I thought, where's this going? Because young kids are coming in off the street, basically, getting jobs as production assistants at various outlets, and good on those outlets for taking them on. Certainly we need media organisations to do that, but essentially they're learning by the same way I learned when I was a cadet. If you had a good boss and you happened to learn what he learnt or she learnt, then they'd hand down their knowledge. But there's gaps in that knowledge, and I think...
Who are they learning from? Is that what you mean?
Well, also just if they've got a gap in their knowledge, they can't pass it on. And I think the good thing about a degree is that we do try to cover, a lot of practical things, to give them the toolkit and the skills to go and do the job, but also, to make the good and correct decisions. And we talk about, say things like the Kim Duthie case. Should we have followed it? For how long should we have followed it? Just because everyone else has published it, does that mean we should? The race to be first is another thing. Everyone wants to be on Twitter and I broke this and broke that. But we need to just have a breath sometimes and say, OK, what is good journalism here and what is the right decision?
What David points to is a really interesting thing, because when I grew up as a kid, sport was basically the back pages of the newspaper. Yeah. And journalists who wrote for sport didn't cross over to the front, even if a story like, what's happened to a Melbourne Cup winner or something went to the front page. Quite often it would be someone in general news that would cover it. Yeah. And it seems to me now that sport journalists actually have to be able to move with the story, and that story doesn't always stay on the field. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is a development in sport journalism. David and I and our colleague Matthew Nicholson did a survey earlier this year, and we contacted about 500 journalists around the country, and we tried to replicate a study done 15 years ago to find out what's changing in the cohort of sport journalists. And one of the big changes is that newspapers are no longer the dominant medium, if you like, for sport journalists. They're moving across all different areas of the media, and of course in new media. And a lot of you look at companies like Sportal, and obviously even within the ABC, a lot of the journalists who cover sport are doing stuff in digital and online as well.
Yeah.
And so really, that it's more important than ever for sport journalism students, like all journalism students, to really understand what they're dealing with when they go online. And, you post an article, you get commentary back from whoever's out there clicking on, and knowing how to manage feedback and of course the kind of often very robust responses you get from readers, and actually understanding how that works. So I think you need all the skills a mainstream journalist needs, plus a specialist knowledge of how to actually to be a journalist in a specific area in sport.
You'd know, Paul, switching from general to sport and back again, that I think the interesting thing, people say what's different about sport journalism. Generally, most people in sport know when the event's on. Most people in general news, you're covering something that's unexpected, or maybe if it's scheduled, you don't quite know how it's going to turn out. With sport, you may not know the result, but you know who's playing, when they're playing, and the audience knows a heck of a lot about it. So there's a heap of pressure on you to get it right, because they, as Lawrie just said, they won't be shy in telling you if you've got it wrong or not.
So who do you hold up when you're holding up examples of work? Do you look for excellence in Australia? Do you look internationally to the great, the almost mythical figures, these great sports writers in the United States from, decades ago?
Well, I had a broadcast background, so I've told the students about a guy that I followed, Rob Bonnet at the BBC, and I was always keen to try to write well in the broadcast forum. Obviously in print you can have a little bit more flexibility, but as you've got to write to your pictures or whatever in television. But I say to them, don't just say, if you're doing a cricket story, don't just say wicket, wicket, wicket and describe what's on. Add to, your writing should add to the pictures, not just describe the pictures.
And who do you hold up then, Lawrie? Who do you look for in excellence in sport journalism? Who are the greats?
Well, I think I've always been a fan of Greg Baum. I think and for me, AFL is a sport I follow. I'm a Hawthorn supporter, so I've been following it very closely in the last few years. And I also think Caroline Wilson at The Age. I actually went to university with her. I followed her career all the way through, and any number of racing journalists. I mean, horse racing is the sport that I follow really closely. I love Steve Moran, his commentaries in Best Bets, and Andrew Eddy, who works at The Age as well, and great colour, and Tony Arrold at The Australian, who I think can get beyond. Sure, they're dealing with a specialist audience when they're writing, but in a way there are reference points to outside of what happens on the track, and they're able to. They're just so well informed about what they're actually writing about that someone like me, who does go to bed with a form guide every Friday night, and every Monday night I like to read about what happened on the weekend. I read every word they write. So for me, that gives me a sense. Well, this is well written. It's telling me things I didn't know by being at the track, and I guess that to me suggests that that they're actually going over and above just what traditionally sport has the knock on sport journalists. What was it that it was called, the toy department of journalism? Well, their actual the way that they write puts the lie on that, and they're actually breaking outside of the mould there, I think. So
what's the hope then for your journos, future journos, people who graduate from your course, that they can compete well with anyone, or that they bring some sort of extra level of high standard to sports journalism? I think that's the main thing, is that they're journalists first and sports fans second, that they can produce really quality work and maybe have the strength of character to leave stuff out. I mean, that's really important, and you don't get any thanks for it. It's really hard to look a news director in the eye and say, look, I really don't think we should, run this story, or, I think we should do it this way and not that way. Regardless of what the pack's doing. I mean, regardless of the pack and the commercial pressure, and the commercial pressure is immense. So I say to students,
don't be too hard on yourself if you find yourself buckling, because
Yeah.
you know, it's immense, the pressure, and people need to sell papers, and I understand that. So I'm not sort of sitting here, I don't teach them this kind of lofty ideal. I think we live in a real world, and media companies need to make money, and good journalism needs to be funded, and we need to keep that in mind. But we do need to say, you know, to ourselves, okay, what is the right approach, you know? So that's the hope, I guess, is that we turn out good people who are good at their job.
We'll watch for the revolution in sports journalism as it takes hold.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for your time.